The war had turned sour far faster than Robb Stark had expected. The banners of the North still flew in the Riverlands, but the air was heavy with bad news. The Ironborn had burned his shores. Winterfell was silent, and ravens carried only whispers of betrayal. His council was split. Lord Bolton spoke of cutting losses, Great John Umber roared for blood, and Catelyn pleaded for peace. But Robb, sitting in the dim light of Riverrun's solar, felt a new thought growing in his mind, one that would make even the boldest lords call him mad. The Lannisters were not the only lions in the world. Across the narrow sea, beyond the merchant cities and the green fields, there was a people unlike any in Westeros, the Dothraki, horse lords whose armies were the wind itself. 40,000 riders could sweep the Riverlands clean of every gold cloak and lion banner in a fortnight. The tales had always been distant things to him, bits of sailor gossip overheard as a boy. But now they were a solution. It was Sir Brynden Tully who first gave shape to the idea. One evening, when the tent was empty save for the two of them, the Blackfish spoke quietly. "Your war is lost here, boy. The Iron Throne will bleed you until you've nothing left to bleed. But in Essos, power can be bought, or taken, by those with the stomach for it." Robb had frowned. "And you think I should abandon the North to burn?" "I think," Brynden said, leaning forward, "that if you try to fight this war the way they expect, you'll lose like they expect. The Dothraki don't fight for kings. They fight for khals. Become one, and you won't be bending the knee to any southerner." The thought festered. By the time the Karstarks turned on him, it was no longer a passing fancy. The Karstark executions had cost him half a host. The Ironborn. Raids had stolen the rest. The war, as it was, could not be won. On the 12th night after Karstark's death, he summoned his most loyal bannermen, Umber, Mormont, Mage, and a handful of Riverlords still true to his cause. He told them the plan plainly. "We leave Westeros. We cross the narrow sea and we take what armies we need. When we return, it will not be to fight for scraps in the Riverlands. We will take the whole of the North back in one stroke, and any lord south of the Neck who stands in our way will taste Dothraki steel." Mage. Mormont laughed as though it were a jest, until she saw he did not smile. Umber grinned, already drunk on the thought of battle. Only Catelyn's face was pale, her voice sharp. "You'd leave your people leaderless. You'd trust strangers, savages, to fight for your home? Robb, they'll burn more than Lannister castles. They'll burn villages. They'll take what they want." Robb had no answer for that then. Only the cold certainty that there would be no home to return to if he stayed. By the end of the month, cloaked in secrecy, Robb's party rode east to the coast under the guise of a retreat toward White Harbor. From there, they boarded ships purchased with nearly every scrap of gold left in the Stark treasury. Captains, from Braavos and Pentos, men who asked no questions and cared only for coin. The sea was endless. The wind clawed at their cloaks. Nights were filled with the creak of timbers and the smell of salt. But each dawn, Robb's eyes looked eastward. He had never seen the Dothraki Sea, but he could picture it, grass stretching beyond the horizon, the earth shaking with the thunder of hooves. If he was to win this war, he would have to stand among them, not as a petitioner, but as a call. The air of Essos was warmer, heavier, and carried scents Robb Stark had never known. Spiced meats roasting over open fires, the sharp tang of strange herbs, and the musk of animals that had never grazed northern fields. The ships had landed at Pentos under a shroud of secrecy. The magisters there eyed Robb and his small retinue like curiosities, not enemies, but not yet friends. Gold bought them food, shelter, and guides, but the real destination lay far inland, where the flat green sea of grass began. It was Sir, Brynden, who warned him before they left the city walls. They'll see you as an outsider. At best, you'll be an amusing fool. At worst, a rival. They follow strength, Robb. Not titles, not oaths, strength. The journey east was days of unbroken grasslands, dotted with the skeletons of ancient stone cities long since abandoned. Robb rode with his direwolf, Grey Wind, always at his side, drawing wary glances from their Pentoshi guide. By the 5th day, the horizon was no longer empty. Riders appeared in the distance, dark shapes moving with impossible speed, closing. The gap like wolves upon a stag. They came in a swirling wave, hundreds at first, then thousands, until the grass itself seemed to bend under the weight of their horses. They rode bare-chested in the heat, armed with curved araks that gleamed in the sun, their hair bound in long braids. Robb had heard stories of the Dothraki charging screaming into battle. The truth was quieter at first, more ominous. They surrounded the small Stark party in a slow, circling motion, saying nothing, eyes studying every sword, every face. From their ranks emerged a man adorned with bronze rings in his hair, his chest painted in crimson swirls. His mount was massive, its tack decorated with the skulls of enemies. He said something sharp in Dothraki, his tone mocking. The guide translated with a nervous stammer. He says, "You look like a boy trying to be a man." And he asks, "If you have come to die." Robb's bannerman bristled, but Grey Wind stepped forward with a low, guttural growl. The horse lord's eyes flicked to the wolf, and there was a murmur among his men. Robb took that moment. He rode forward, meeting the man's gaze, and answered not in words but by drawing his sword and pointing its tip toward the horizon. Then he thumped his own chest once, hard. It was a simple gesture, a challenge. The Khal laughed, a deep, rolling sound, and gestured for the circle to open. 2 riders stepped forward, tossing a spear into the dust between them. The meaning was clear: trial by combat. Robb dismounted, the grass whispering against his boots. His opponent was tall, quick, and fast as a striking snake. The first blow came in a blur of steel, the arak hissing past Robb's cheek. The next was met with a parry, the sound ringing out across the field. The fight was short, brutal. Robb took a slice to his forearm, but found his opening when the Dothraki overextended. With a twist of his blade and a shove of his shoulder, Robb sent, the man sprawling. Grey Wind snarled at the prone warrior, and the Khal's men erupted in shouts, half anger, half admiration. The Khal dismounted, walking to Robb with measured steps. He studied the young wolf for a long moment, then grinned, a predator's grin. He placed a hand on Robb's shoulder and spoke a few slow words. The guide's voice trembled as he translated. He says, "You are no boy. You will ride with him." Robb knew it was not friendship yet, but it was a start. The Dothraki Sea was unlike anything Robb Stark had ever known. The wind rolled endlessly across grass that swayed like the tides, and the sky seemed to stretch without end. At first, he found it beautiful, the open air, the freedom, the way. The sun blazed on the horizon at dawn, but beauty here was edged with danger. The khalasar moved like a living beast. Hundreds of riders fanned out in a vast formation, their families and herds trailing behind. At night, fires burned in scattered circles, each claimed by its own blood riders and kin. Strangers did not cross into another circle without risk of a blade at their throat. Robb quickly learned that titles meant nothing. King in the North drew only puzzled looks. Here, power was measured in the strength of your arm, the speed of your horse, and the fear you could put in a man's eyes. The Khal he now rode with, Khal Rhaego, named after some long-dead hero, was a man of contradictions. He laughed easily, but killed without pause. He welcomed Robb into his circle, but only as a curiosity at first, the pale-skinned rider. with the great gray beast at his side. Rhaego's blood riders, however, were less generous. One in particular, a scarred man named Vejo, seemed determined to see Robb fail at every turn. When they hunted, Vejo would drive game toward Robb, forcing him into risky charges. When they sparred, he came at Robb with full intent to wound, not merely test him. Robb bore it, for to complain would mark him as weak, but he learned quickly. How to fight from horseback with the Arak, how to strike low and turn fast, how to use gray wind as more than a threat. Life in the khalasar had its rules, brutal and absolute. A man kept what he could take and defend. Blood debts were paid in blood. Cowards had no place except as slaves. Robb found himself changing. The patience of the Stark Lord was still there, but his edges were sharpening. He spoke more in action than words. His hands, once accustomed to the grip of a long sword, grew familiar with the curve of an Arak. His northern armor gave way to boiled leather, light and fitted for speed. One evening, after weeks of riding, the khalasar descended upon a trading village at the edge of the grasslands. The merchants had paid tribute before, bolts of silk, sacks of grain. But this time, they refused. Rhaego ordered a raid. Robb hesitated. The village was undefended save for a few guards. The Stark in him balked at the slaughter of farmers. But the khalasar did not share his hesitation. They rode in, setting fire to thatch roofs, cutting down those who resisted and taking the rest as spoils. Robb joined the charge, but he struck only at the armed. His restraint did not go unnoticed. Later, by the fires, Vejo spat in the dirt near him. "A Khal who spares his enemies is no Khal at all," he said in halting common. Robb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He understood that here, mercy was seen as weakness. Yet abandoning it entirely would mean losing the part of himself that made him Stark. The true test came sooner than expected. Weeks later, another khalasar appeared on the horizon, banners streaming in the wind. Rhaego rode to meet them, and what began as tense talk quickly turned to blows. The rival Khal, a thick-set man with gold rings braided into his beard, challenged Rhaego directly. Robb watched as the two men clashed, steel flashing in the sun. Then with a sudden vicious strike, the rival's Arak tore deep into Rhaego's thigh. The Khal fell, blood darkening the grass. Gasps rippled through the riders. The rival Khal turned his eyes toward Robb. "If your Khal cannot ride, you ride in his place, or you die where you stand." Robb felt every gaze upon him, the weight of decision pressing like a stone. Robb's hand went to the hilt of his sword before his mind had even caught up. Gray wind stepped forward, lips peeled back, a low growl rolling through the grass like distant thunder. Around him, the khalasar fell silent, a tense, expectant quiet that was somehow louder than their battle shouts had been moments before. The rival Khal sat high on his horse, his braid swaying in the wind, gold rings glinting in the sun. His Arak was wet with Rhaego's blood. He smiled. A wolf's smile if a wolf had ever known arrogance. Robb felt the sting of Catelyn's voice in his head. "These are not your people. This is not your war." But that thought lasted only a heartbeat. He looked at Rhaego, clutching his leg, teeth clenched against the pain. In the Dothraki way, a Khal who could not ride was already dead. If Robb stepped back, the man who had brought him into this world would be cut down in the dust. And if he stepped forward, he would be fighting for far more than Rhaego. He would be fighting for his own life, his own place in this vast sea of riders. He rode forward. "Come then," he said, the words in common but the tone universal. The rival laughed and spurred his horse. The first pass was lightning, the Arak flashing for Robb's throat. He ducked low in the saddle, feeling the wind of the blade pass over him, and slashed upward. Steel met leather, and the rival's shoulder bloomed red. They circled, hooves tearing the grass. The second pass came harder, faster, the rival leaning low to take Robb's head. Robb pulled hard left, let the blow miss by inches, then lashed out with his boot, striking the man's ribs. The rival grunted, nearly losing his balance. The khalasar roared in approval, the noise swelling like a tide. The third pass was the end. Robb didn't aim for the body. He aimed for the braid. As the rival leaned in for the killing stroke, Robb's sword rose in a perfect arc. There was a snap like breaking rope, and the man's braid fell to the grass. Gasps rippled through the crowd. To lose one's braid was a humiliation worse than death. But Robb wasn't done. Before the man could recover, Robb turned his horse sharply, bringing his blade around in a brutal cut across the man's chest. The rival toppled from the saddle, blood soaking his vest. Gray wind was on him in a heartbeat, pinning him with jaws at his throat. Robb raised his sword high. "This man challenged my place among riders," he shouted, letting the words come, slow, deliberate. He lost. Then, in the Dothraki tongue, rough and unpolished but loud enough for all to hear, he said, "I ride. I lead. Follow me, or fall beneath me." The khalasar erupted in a mix of cheers and the pounding of araks against shields. Rhaego, pale and sweating, gave a short nod. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "Khal Wolf," he said, almost to himself. That night, Robb sat beside the great fire. The Blood Riders came to him, one by one, to touch his arm and acknowledge the victory. Even Vejo bowed his head, though his eyes still carried challenge. Robb knew then. The path to leading these people was not through friendship or bargain. It was through dominance, through proving again and again that he was strong enough to ride at the front. And every victory would make it harder to turn back into the man he had been in Westeros. But the war in the Seven Kingdoms still waited, for him. And now, for the first time, he could imagine riding back, not as Robb Stark, boy king of the North, but as Khal Wolf with a tide of horsemen at his back. Winter never touched the Dothraki sea, but Robb Stark felt a different kind of cold settling in him. It had been moons since the fight that earned him the name Khal Wolf. Rhaego's wound had left him unable to ride for long, and though he still bore the title of Khal, the true strength of the khalasar now rode with Robb. It wasn't official, not yet, but every raid, every hunt, every challenge was directed toward the young foreigner with the direwolf. The first real step toward the power came when another khalasar crossed their path. Khal Toros was younger than Rhaego, but richer in spoils. His riders hung with silver bells that rang as they moved. The Dothraki had no kings, no thrones, but they understood alliances when it suited them. Robb rode to meet Toros with only gray wind at his side. The meeting began with laughter, wine, and the trading of boasts, but beneath it all lay the weight of unspoken threats. Toros wanted Rhaego's herds, and Robb could see it in his eyes. Robb wanted Toros's numbers, 5,000 more riders to break the back of any Lannister host. The bargain they struck was simple on the surface. The khalasars would ride together against richer prey, splitting the spoils. But the truth was sharper. Robb promised Toros something the Dothraki had never been offered before. A land of stone keeps, Robb said, in words the translator barely managed to shape. A land where the gold grows in the walls and the women are pale as milk. A land no Khal has ever conquered. Toros's eyes narrowed. "This is your home?" "Yes," Robb said, "and I will take it back. You will ride with me when I do." The promise of conquest lit a fire in Toros that no sack of a merchant town could match. He agreed, but only after Robb proved his worth in a contest of skill, not with blades this time, but with horses. They raced across the open grass, the wind tearing at their hair, gray wind pacing alongside like a ghost. Robb won by the length of a horse's head, and Toros laughed so hard he nearly fell from the saddle. One khalasar became two. Then, after another moon of riding, two became three. Word spread of the pale Khal with the wolf who did not fall in battle. Robb's banner, a gray wolf on white, began to fly beside the horsehair standards of his new allies. The Dothraki were not united, not truly, but they followed strength, and strength was something Robb gave them in abundance. But every victory brought him closer to a truth he could not ignore. Bringing these men to Westeros would not be as simple as pointing them west and saying, "Ride." Ships were rare in the grasslands, and Dothraki hated the sea like a sickness. 2. Move tens of thousands of riders across the narrow sea, Robb would need more than coin. He would need the help of those who ruled the harbors. That meant turning toward the great cities of Essos. When he told his closest riders, Rhaego, Vejo, and Toros among them, that they would be heading toward the port of Meereen to seek ships, there was unease. Some feared the slavers, others simply hated the walls of cities. Robb soothed them with the promise of richer plunder than any grassland village could offer. Yet as the khalasars rode toward the coast, Robb could not shake the feeling that this bargain, to trade with the kind of men who sold humans in chains, would cost him something more precious than gold. One night, beneath a sky of cold stars, Brynden Tully sat across from him at the fire. "You've changed, boy," the Blackfish said quietly. "I can't tell if you're becoming the man you need to be, or the man you swore you'd never become." Robb didn't answer, because for the first time since leaving Westeros, he didn't know. Meereen rose from the horizon like a cruel dream. Its walls were high, pale stone baking in the sun, and the great harpy loomed over the city. Wings spread, claws outstretched, a silent warning to all who approached. Even the Dothraki riders grew quieter as they drew near. The sea air carried a tang that made them uneasy, and beyond the harbors, ships rocked in the tide like tethered beasts. Robb had seen castles, but Meereen was no castle. It was a marketplace for souls. The gates were flanked by slavers in gilded armor, and beyond them stretched streets lined with chains, men, women, and children shackled in rows, their eyes hollow. Rhaego spat in the dust. "Cities are cages," he muttered in Dothraki, "and cages breed cowards." Robb forced himself to look at the ships. Sleek galleys, heavy merchant cogs, even a few warships, enough to carry thousands if he could. Get them. But in Meereen, nothing came without a price. The meeting with the great masters was held in a shaded hall hung with silks. Robb was dressed in the boiled leather and horsehair of a Khal, gray wind sitting at his feet like a living shadow. The slavers were men swollen with wealth, their fingers heavy with rings, their eyes darting between the wolf and its master. Through his translator, Robb made his offer plain: gold, plunder, and the promise of first claim to the spoils of Westeros's southern cities in exchange for ships enough to cross the narrow sea. The masters listened, then laughed. One draped in green silk leaned forward. "Gold is for merchants. We are traders in flesh. Bring us 10,000 slaves from the grasslands, and you will have your fleet." Robb's stomach turned. "I don't trade in flesh," he said, flatly. The master's smile was thin. "Then you don't sail." Outside, Toros and Vejo pressed him hard. "They are only captives," Toros argued. "Not of your people. Take them from the weak khalasars and give them to these men. The sea will carry us to your war." Robb's answer was silence. That night, Brynden found him again, watching the ships in the harbor from a balcony. "You can't bring that many riders over the sea without paying a price, lad," he said. "The question is who pays it, them or you?" The choice hung over him like a sword. To refuse meant watching the chance to take Westeros slip away. To agree meant becoming the kind of man who sold lives for his own gain. At dawn, the decision came. Robb rode back to the great masters with 50 Dothraki riders at his back, but they weren't there to bargain. They were there to take. The gates of the master's compound fell before Grey Wind's snarl and the flash of steel. Robb's riders poured in, seizing ships by force, cutting down guards and freeing every slave they found. The masters were dragged into the dust, stripped of their silks, and left for the freed to judge. The harbor was chaos, but it was theirs. By nightfall, Robb had control of half the fleet. The freed slaves, some too broken to speak, knelt before him. Others simply vanished into the city's streets. Vejo was furious. "We could have taken more ships if we had given them what they asked." Robb met his glare. "I came here to take my home back, not to build it on chains." The Dothraki didn't all approve, but they respected strength. And taking Meereen's ships without bending the knee to slavers was strength they understood. By the next sunrise, sails unfurled to the wind. The fleet was ready. The grasslands were far behind. The narrow sea lay ahead. And in Robb's heart, the wolf and the Khal rode as one. The narrow sea was not made for horses, but Robb Stark made it theirs. The voyage took weeks, the Dothraki restless and sick from the rolling waves. More than once, fights broke out on deck, blades drawn until Robb's voice cut through the chaos, like steel. Grey Wind prowled the ships, as if sensing his master's tension, his yellow eyes watching the horizon. When the coast of Westeros finally appeared, it was not the green hills of the Reach, or the bustling docks of King's Landing, that greeted them. Robb had chosen the coast of the Vale, wild, rocky, and thinly defended. No one expected an army from the east to land there. The first ships beached at dawn. The Dothraki disembarked like a flood released from a dam, hooves pounding the wet sand, war cries rising into the gull-filled sky. They moved inland with frightening speed, cutting through villages before the Vale's knights could muster. Robb kept the looting focused, striking at Lannister-aligned garrisons and leaving the common folk with more fear than bloodshed. But the news spread fast. By the time they reached the fertile valleys beyond Gulltown, the banners of House Arryn were flying. Sir Lyn Corbray rode at the front of a force of 2,000, shining knights in polished steel, their lines perfect. The Dothraki had never faced Westerosi knights before. They laughed at the heavy armor, the plodding destriers, the rigid formation. Robb knew better. The Vale's cavalry was deadly when it struck in unison. He placed himself at the front, not behind. "We break them here," he told Toros and Vejo, "or the rest of the Seven Kingdoms will think us weak." The charge began with the Vale's trumpets, a wall of lances lowering as they thundered forward. Robb's riders didn't meet them head-on. They split, two curved waves flowing around the lances, striking at flanks and rears. Araks sliced through reins and throats alike. Robb himself met Sir Lyn in the chaos, the knight's blade ringing against his own. Lyn's strength was like a battering ram, but Robb's speed and the reach of his foreign-forged Arak kept him alive. A feint to the left, a twist of his wrist, and Lyn's sword clattered to the ground. By midday, the Vale host was in full retreat. The Dothraki circled the captured knights, their braids swinging, voices jeering. Some wanted to kill them outright. Robb forbade it. "Send them home," he ordered. "Let them tell the rest what rides in Westeros now." That mercy was not for the knights. It was for the message. Fear would travel faster than any raven. Within a week, Robb's khalasar swelled. Northern bannermen who had thought him dead now rode to his side, awed and wary of the horse lords at his command. Word came from the Riverlands. The Lannisters were pulling troops from the south to meet the new threat. Brynden Tully found him by the campfires one night. "You've done it, boy. You've made them afraid. Now the hard part comes, deciding if you're still here to save the North or if you mean to take all of it." Robb didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the dark hills ahead, where he knew the Lannister banners would soon rise. The wolf in him wanted his home back. The Khal in him wanted the whole kingdom. The riverlands burned again, but this time the fire came from the east. The Dothraki swept through fields and hamlets like a storm, their hooves shaking the earth. At their head rode Robb Stark, Khal wolf, his armor a blend of boiled leather and northern steel, his arak and longsword both red from battle. The Lannisters had chosen Harrenhal as their fortress, counting on its thick, blackened walls to hold until reinforcements came from the south. They had not counted on riders who moved like water. Robb split his khalasars into 3 wings. Toros led the first, striking at the supply lines. Vejo took the second, circling the lake to cut off escape. Robb led the third straight at the gate, not to breach it but to lure the defenders into a charge. When the Lannister knights poured, out the trap closed, the Dothraki surrounding them in a tightening ring, cutting them down before they could wheel their heavy destriers back. Inside the castle, the fight was worse. The halls echoed with screams, steel on steel, the smell of fire and death thick in the air. Robb moved through it like a man possessed, Grey Wind always at his side. When he finally found Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer was leaning against a pillar, blood on his golden armor, a grin on his lips. "So the young wolf grew fangs," Jaime said. Robb didn't waste words. Their blades met in a clash that jarred his arm to the shoulder. Jaime was faster than he remembered, every move sharp and dangerous. But the khalasar's way had changed Robb. His strikes came from odd angles, low sweeps, and sudden twists that Westerosi knights weren't trained to counter. In the end, Jaime fell, disarmed and kneeling. Robb's arak hovered at his throat. Killing him would be vengeance for Ned, a blow to the Lannisters that might end the war. Sparing him would be a message. He thought of his father, of the boy he had been before he crossed the sea. Then he drove the blade forward. Jaime Lannister's head rolled across the flagstones. By sunset, Harrenhal was his. The Lannister banners burned in the courtyards, replaced by the direwolf of Stark and the horsehair standards of the Dothraki. The river lords bent the knee, some in fear, some in hope. Brynden Tully came to him that night. "You've broken them," the Blackfish said. "The road to King's Landing is open, but so is the road north. Which will it be?" Robb looked over the campfires, thousands of them stretching into the dark. These were his now, the wild horse lords of Essos, the freedmen from Meereen, the Northmen who had returned to him. "I will take King's Landing," he said at last, "and then I will take the rest. The 7 kingdoms will not be 7 any more. They will be mine." And in the silence that followed, Grey Wind lifted his head and howled, a sound that rolled over the blackened towers of Harrenhal, out across the night and into the hearts of men who knew that a new kind of king now ruled Westeros, a king who was also a Khal, a wolf who had crossed the sea and never lost the taste of it.